I was driving through a stretch of land that barely felt like part of the country anymore. No houses, no gas stations, no lights. Just a long two-lane road cutting through dry land and low hills that went on forever. I had already been driving for hours, and the sun was starting to drop low enough to turn everything orange. The map said this road was the fastest way, but it didn't feel like a real route anymore. It felt like a mistake I was already too deep into. The farther I went, the more empty it became. The road surface changed from smooth to cracked, patched in places like someone had given up fixing it properly. There were old fences running along parts of the land, broken in sections, leaning at odd angles. Some of the fence posts were snapped clean off, like something heavy had leaned on them years ago, and nobody bothered to replace them. I didn't see any animals. No cows, no birds, nothing moving. That silence stuck with me more than noise would have. My fuel gauge was lower than I liked. I knew I should have turned back earlier, but I kept telling myself there had to be something ahead. A town, a station, anything. The road signs were old and faded, some of them so sun-bleached you couldn't read them anymore. One sign pointed toward a place name I didn't recognize. The arrow bent slightly downward like it had been hit by something hard. That place name meant nothing to me, but it was the only sign of human planning I'd seen in a long time. Eventually, my phone lost signal completely. No bars, no data. Just a blank screen showing the time. That was when the drive started to feel heavier. Not scary in a dramatic way, just uncomfortable. Like the land was too big, and I was too small to be out there alone. The sky kept darkening, and the shadows from the hills stretched across the road. The car started making a noise I hadn't heard before. A low whining sound that came and went when I pressed the gas. I eased up, trying not to push it. A few minutes later, the engine light came on. I told myself it was nothing, but my stomach tightened anyway. Then, without warning, the car lost power. The steering went stiff, the engine sputtered, and I barely managed to coast onto the dirt shoulder before it died completely. I sat there for a long moment, hands still on the wheel, listening to the quiet. No wind. No insects. Just my own breathing. I tried starting the car again. Nothing. I tried again. Still nothing. The dashboard lights flickered once and went dark. I knew right then I wasn't driving anywhere anytime soon. I got out of the car and looked around. The land stretched out in every direction, flat in some places, rolling in others. The road behind me was empty. The road ahead disappeared over a small rise. There were no buildings, no lights, no signs of life. The air smelled dry and dusty, like old dirt that hadn't seen rain in a long time. The sun finally dipped below the hills, and the temperature dropped fast. I checked my phone again. Still no signal. I walked a short distance down the road, hoping maybe I'd catch one bar if I held it up high. Nothing changed. I went back to the car and popped the hood, even though I knew I wouldn't be able to fix anything. The engine smelled hot and wrong. Something had clearly failed. As the light faded, I started to notice small details that I hadn't paid attention to before. Old tire tracks leading off the road into the dirt, not recent, but not ancient either. Bits of trash half buried near the fence line. A broken side mirror lying in the dust, cracked and cloudy, like it had been there a long time. It made me realize other people had been stranded here before, and that thought didn't comfort me. Night came fast. The sky filled with stars, more than I'd ever seen before, but they didn't make me feel calm. They made the darkness feel deeper. I turned on the car's interior light for a moment, then shut it off. It felt wrong to draw attention to myself, even though there was nobody around. I stayed inside the car, doors locked, windows cracked just enough for air. Time moved slowly. Every small sound felt louder than it should have been. The metal of the car ticking as it cooled. A faint wind brushing through the dry grass. Somewhere far away, something moved, but I couldn't tell what it was. I didn't imagine monsters or anything like that. I imagined real things. Other stranded people. People who might not want to be seen. Hours passed. I tried starting the car again, just in case. Nothing. My phone battery slowly dropped. I stopped checking it to save power. I leaned the seat back slightly, but couldn't sleep. The ground felt like it was watching me, even though that made no sense. It was just land, but it felt empty in a way that pressed on my chest. Sometime near dawn, I saw headlights far down the road. At first, I thought I was imagining them, but they grew brighter. A single vehicle approached, slow and steady. It didn't stop near me. It didn't even slow down much. It passed by, headlights washing over my car, then disappeared into the distance. That was somehow worse than if nothing had passed at all. When the sun finally came up, the world looked less threatening, but more bleak. Everything was exactly as it had been the night before. Empty. Still. My fuel gauge hadn't moved. My car was still dead. But in daylight, I could see a thin line of smoke far off in the distance, barely visible against the sky. I grabbed some water, locked the car, and started walking toward it. The walk felt endless. Every step kicked up dust. My legs burned. The sun climbed higher, and the heat returned. After what felt like hours, I reached a small cluster of buildings. Abandoned mostly. One structure still had power. A maintenance station for the road, barely hanging on. I found help there. A tow truck came later that day. When I finally left that place behind, riding in the tow truck, I looked back at the road stretching into nothing. It looked harmless in daylight. Just land and asphalt. But I knew how it felt when you were alone out there, stuck with nowhere to go. And I knew I'd never take that road again, no matter how fast the map said it was. I drove out there because I wanted quiet, and because I thought I knew what quiet really was. The road had stopped being paved almost an hour earlier, turning into pale dirt with deep grooves cut by trucks that came through only when they had to. My phone lost signal long before that, not suddenly, but slowly, bar by bar, until it showed nothing at all. I remember noticing it and thinking it felt good. No calls, no messages, no noise. Just the engine, the wind through an open window, and the dry smell of dust and weeds. The place wasn't on any map app. It was something I had saved in my head from years earlier, a wide stretch of land where an old service road cut through scrub and low hills. No houses, no power lines, no fences for miles. The sky felt bigger there. The clouds seemed lower, like they were pressing down on the land instead of floating above it. I parked near what used to be a pull-off for maintenance trucks, shut the engine off, and sat there for a while, listening to the ticking sound as the heat left the hood. The silence was heavy, not peaceful the way people talk about. It had weight to it. Every small sound stood out. Wind moving through dry grass. A bird far off then gone. The crunch of my boots when I stepped out. I had brought water, food, and a sleeping bag, planning to stay one night and leave early in the morning. Just a reset, I told myself. Nothing dramatic. I walked a bit to stretch my legs, staying close to the road at first. The land looked empty, but it wasn't clean empty. There were old signs of people everywhere if you paid attention. Rusted metal half buried in the dirt. Pieces of broken wood that had once been part of something straight and useful. Tire tracks that didn't look fresh, but didn't look that old either. I noticed those more than anything. They went off the road in a way that didn't make sense, like someone had turned suddenly and then stopped. As the sun dropped lower, the temperature fell fast. I set up my sleeping bag in the back of the car with the hatch open, thinking it would feel safer than being fully outside. I ate slowly, watching the light change the color of the ground from pale brown to deep orange, then to a flat gray. When it got dark all at once. No city glow, no distant lights. Just black, broken only by stars that felt close enough to touch. That was when I started to feel watched. Not in a dramatic way. There was no sudden fear, no rush of adrenaline. It was more like an uncomfortable awareness, the same feeling you get when you realize someone has been standing behind you for a while. I told myself it was nothing. Out there, every sound travels weird. Every shadow looks deeper than it really is. I lay back and tried to sleep. Sleep came in short pieces. I would drift off and then wake up again for no clear reason. Each time, I lay still and listened. Wind. Insects. The soft creak of the car cooling. Then sometime deep into the night, I heard something different. A slow, uneven sound on the dirt road. Not fast enough to be a car. Too heavy to be an animal moving naturally. It came and went like whoever or whatever was making it would move, stop, then move again. I stayed completely still. I didn't reach for my phone because I already knew it wouldn't work. I didn't turn on a light. I just listened. The sound got closer, then stopped again. I could hear breathing, not loud, but real, the kind that carries when the air is cold and dry. It wasn't close enough to touch the car, but it was close enough that I knew it was there. Time stretched out in a way that's hard to explain. Minutes felt like hours. My body felt heavy, like it didn't want to move even if I told it to. Eventually, the sound moved away. The breathing faded. The steps grew softer until they blended into the normal night noise. I didn't sleep after that. I watched the sky lighten slowly, waiting for the first hint of morning. When the sun finally came up, the fear didn't disappear. It changed. In daylight, The place looked even more empty, and that made what had happened feel worse, not better. I got out of the car and walked around, trying to find some normal explanation. That's when I saw the footprints. They were clear in the dirt near the road. Not animal tracks. Not boot prints either. The shape was wrong for both. Wide in the front, uneven in the heel, pressed deep like whoever made them had been standing there for a long time. They stopped a few feet from where my car had been parked, then turned back the way they came. No drag marks. No sign of running. Just slow, deliberate steps. I packed up fast after that. I didn't take my time. I didn't explore. I didn't sit and think. I got in the car and started driving as soon as everything was inside. About 20 minutes down the road, I passed a spot I hadn't noticed on the way in. A cluster of old vehicles, stripped down to metal frames, hidden in a shallow dip in the land. Nearby, there were dark patches on the ground and more of the same footprints, going in different directions, overlapping each other. I didn't stop. The road eventually turned back into pavement. My phone buzzed all at once as signal came back, messages and alerts stacking on top of each other. I didn't check any of them right away. I kept driving until I saw other cars, buildings, people moving around like the world was normal. I never went back there. I don't talk about it much either. There was no single moment where something clearly terrible happened, no clear thread I could point to and explain. What stayed with me was the certainty that someone had been there with me in the middle of nowhere, close enough to hear me breathe, and had chosen to leave on their own terms. That was enough. I took the long way home because I wanted the drive to be quiet. The shorter route had traffic and lights and people everywhere. The longer one cut through miles of empty land, where the road went straight for so long that it felt like it was standing still. Dry ground on both sides, no houses, no fences, just dirt, low bushes, and wind that pushed dust across the asphalt. It was late afternoon, the sun low enough to make everything look flat and yellow. I had water, a full tank, and no reason to rush. The farther I went, the more the world shrank down to just my car and the road. No radio stations came in clearly. My phone lost signal a long time ago. The engine sound became the only steady thing, and I didn't notice how tense my shoulders were until I rolled them and felt the ache. I remember thinking how easy it would be to disappear out there. Not in a dramatic way, just quietly, like nothing had ever passed through it all. About an hour in, I noticed something dark far ahead on the shoulder. At first it looked like trash or a shadow, but as I got closer it became a vehicle. An old pickup, angled slightly off the road, driver's side door open. No movement around it, no hazard lights. Just sitting there like it had been abandoned halfway through a thought. I slowed down without meaning to, my foot easing off the gas. I told myself to keep going. There was nothing I could really do. I wasn't a mechanic. I didn't have a signal. Stopping out there didn't make sense. Still, as I passed, I glanced over. The inside of the truck looked empty. No one standing nearby. The door was open wide, bouncing slightly in the wind. That image stuck with me longer than it should have. 10 minutes later my car shuddered. It was small at first, like driving over rough pavement, then it happened again, harder. A warning light came on. The engine lost power. I tried easing it, then pressing the gas, but the speed kept dropping. I guided the car to the shoulder and let it roll to a stop. The sudden silence felt heavy, like pressure on my ears. I sat there for a moment with my hands on the wheel, breathing slow, trying not to jump to conclusions. Cars break down. That's normal. I turned the key. The engine turned but didn't catch. I tried again. Same thing. I popped the hood and stepped out into the heat. The air smelled like dust and hot metal. When I opened the hood, heat rolled up into my face. I didn't know what I was looking at, just shapes and hoses and the faint tick of cooling metal. I checked what I could, mostly pretending to be useful. Everything looked the same as it always did, which didn't help at all. I went back to the car and checked my phone even though I already knew. No signal. No bars. I looked down the road in both directions. Empty. The road stretched out flat and quiet, like it had no memory of me at all. That was when I thought about the truck again. How it had been sitting there with the door open. How close it really was. I told myself it was coincidence. People run out of gas. People walk for help. That was the logical explanation. I drank some water, got back in the car to sit in the shade, and waited. Time passed in a slow, sticky way. The sun dropped lower. Shadows stretched longer. The heat faded, replaced by a dry chill that made my skin tight. I noticed footprints in the dirt near my car. That shouldn't have surprised me, since I had walked around, but these were different. Larger. Deep in some places, lighter in others, like someone had been pacing. I followed them with my eyes, and my stomach tightened when I realized they didn't come from my car. They came from the road. From the direction of the truck. I stayed inside after that, doors locked, windows cracked just enough for air. I watched the road. I watched the bushes. Every sound felt louder than it should have been. Whine through dry plants sounded like movement. Small rocks ticking against metal made me flinch. I kept thinking I saw something at the edge of my vision, but when I focused, there was nothing there. As the light faded, I saw a shape far down the road. At first I thought it was another vehicle, but it moved too slowly. It was a person, walking in the middle of the road, not hurried, not stopping, just coming closer step by step. I didn't get out. I didn't wave. I stayed still and watched through the windshield. The person veered off the road before getting close, disappearing into the brush on my side. I couldn't see them anymore, but I could feel that they were closer than they should be. My heart was beating so hard that it felt like it was shaking my ribs. I stayed frozen, listening, counting breaths, waiting for something to happen. Minutes passed. Nothing touched the car. Nothing knocked. The dark settled in fully, and the stars came out sharp and bright, uncaring. Eventually, far in the distance, I saw headlights. Real ones this time. A vehicle moving fast, steady. Relief hit me so hard it made me lightheaded. The vehicle slowed when it reached me and stopped ahead. A road service truck. I didn't ask questions. I didn't explain everything I felt. The car was towed. I rode along, staring out the window, watching the darkness slide by. As we drove past the old pickup, it was gone. No truck. No sign it had ever been there. Later, in a town with lights and noise and people, I filed a report about the abandoned vehicle and what I saw. They told me they would check it out. My car was fixed the next day. Everything went back to normal on the surface. But even now, when I drive through open land and the road stretches too far ahead, my hands tighten on the wheel. I think about how quickly things can stop working, how quiet the world can become, and how being alone in the middle of nowhere doesn't always mean you are actually alone. I was driving through the middle of nowhere because it was the fastest route according to the map, even though it didn't feel right. The road was a thin strip of cracked asphalt cutting through flat land that went on forever. No trees tall enough to give shade, no houses, no fences, nothing that showed people lived out there. Just dry grass, dirt, and a sky that felt too big. The sun was already low, turning everything orange, and I knew I should have stopped earlier, but I kept going. My car started acting strange about an hour after I lost cell service. The temperature gauge crept higher than normal. I could smell something hot, like metal and rubber. I told myself it would hold until the next town, even though I hadn't seen a sign for one in a long time. When the engine finally died, it happened all at once. The car jerked, the dashboard lights went dark, and I rolled to a stop on the side of the road. The silence that followed felt heavy, like the land itself was pressing in. I got out and popped the hood. Heat rushed out, along with that burnt smell. I knew enough to tell the car wasn't going anywhere. No signal, no passing cars, no sound except the wind moving through the grass. The road stretched straight in both directions, empty as far as I could see. Walking felt risky, but staying felt worse. The sun kept dropping, and the air started to cool fast. I grabbed water from the trunk and started walking in the direction I'd been heading, figuring there had to be something eventually. After about 40 minutes, I noticed tire tracks leaving the road and cutting into the dirt. They were fresh enough to stand out. That gave me a strange kind of hope. Someone else had been out there recently. I followed them, stepping off the road and into the open land. The ground was uneven, full of small rocks and dry weeds that scratched my legs. The tracks led to a small structure I couldn't see clearly at first because it blended into the land. It was a low building made of concrete blocks, maybe an old utility shed or pump station. No lights, no windows on the side facing me. Just a heavy metal door that looked slightly crooked. As I got closer, I noticed other things. Old footprints in the dirt, overlapping and going in different directions. Rusted cans. A torn piece of fabric caught on a wire. The place felt used, but not maintained. Like people came and went, but no one stayed long enough to care. I stood there for a long time, debating whether to go inside. The sky was turning purple, and the wind had picked up. Staying outside overnight, in that open land, felt dangerous. I pushed the door open with effort, and it scraped loudly against the concrete floor inside. The air was cooler in there, but it smelled damp and stale. The room was bigger than I expected, with old equipment pushed against the walls. Thick dust covered everything. I stepped carefully, listening to my own breathing and the sound of my shoes on the floor. I checked corners, expecting animals, but found none. I decided to stay the night. I sat against the wall, drank water slowly, and tried to rest. Time moved strangely in that place. Without light, it was hard to tell how late it was. Every small sound felt louder. The wind outside would hit the building, making the metal door rattle just enough to keep me alert. Sometime during the night, I noticed something that made my stomach tighten. There were marks on the floor that I hadn't seen before. Long lines, like something heavy had been dragged across the concrete many times. They led toward the back of the room, where a second door sat half hidden behind equipment. I hadn't checked it earlier. I stood up slowly and walked toward it. The closer I got, the stronger the smell became. Old sweat, rot, and something else I didn't want to think about. The door wasn't locked. Inside was a smaller room, darker and more humid. The floor was stained in places. Chains were bolted into the wall. Not old decorative chains, but thick ones, worn smooth from use. My heart was pounding so hard I felt it in my throat. This wasn't some abandoned shed. This was a place people had used for something bad, something planned. I backed out carefully, my hands shaking. I didn't want to imagine who had been there or why. I didn't sleep after that. I stayed sitting against the wall near the main door, watching the thin line of light under it slowly change as morning came. When the sun finally rose, I felt relief so strong it almost made me weak. I stepped outside as soon as it was light enough to see clearly. That was when I noticed more things I had missed the day before. A shallow pit not far from the building, filled in with dirt that didn't match the surrounding ground. More tracks, some leading away, some coming back. The place felt wrong in daylight in a different way. Clearer. More real. I didn't go back inside. I walked back toward the road, faster this time, my mind racing. After what felt like hours, I heard an engine. A truck appeared in the distance, kicking up dust as it came closer. I waved both arms until my shoulders burned. The driver slowed and stopped. I don't remember the ride clearly. I remember the smell of fuel, the vibration of the road, and the feeling of getting farther away from that place. I was dropped off at the next town, where help finally felt normal again. My car was later towed and written off as a loss. I didn't argue. I didn't go back to collect anything. I reported the building to the authorities, gave directions as best I could, and answered questions. I never heard what they found, and I didn't follow up. Even now, when I drive long empty roads, I feel my chest tighten. The middle of nowhere doesn't feel empty to me anymore. It feels like a place where things can happen unseen, where the land keeps secrets because no one is around to hear them. I learned that day that being alone isn't always quiet, and remote doesn't mean harmless. The world is bigger and darker than it looks from a road, and sometimes the scariest places are the ones people use and then pretend never existed. I was driving through a stretch of land that felt forgotten by time. The road was a thin strip of cracked asphalt cutting through miles of dry dirt, dead grass, and low hills that all looked the same. No houses, no fences, no signs except the occasional rusted mile marker leaning like it had given up. I had been driving for hours with nothing but the sound of the engine and the wind pushing against the truck. The sun was high but weak, the kind that makes everything look pale and flat. I wasn't lost at first. I knew where I was supposed to be, or at least I thought I did. But the farther I drove, the more the place felt wrong. The land didn't change. It didn't give any hints that I was getting closer to anything. Every mile looked exactly like the last one. The gas gauge sat lower than I liked, and my phone had lost signal a long time ago. I wasn't worried yet, but I was alert in a quiet way, like my body knew something my mind hadn't caught up to. The truck started to feel different after a while. The steering wheel had a slight shake. The engine sound wasn't as smooth. I told myself it was just the road, but then a sharp vibration ran through the floor, followed by a sudden pull to the right. I slowed down and felt the tire give out. The truck rolled to a stop on the shoulder, dust drifting up and settling slowly around me. When I stepped out, the air felt heavy and dry, like it had been sitting still for years. The silence was deep. No birds. No insects. Just the faint ticking of the engine cooling down. The tire was shredded, rubber torn open like it had been sliced. I checked the back for a spare, already knowing the answer before I looked. The spare was there, but flat and cracked, useless. I stood there for a long time, looking down the road in both directions. It stretched on forever, empty and quiet. Walking didn't feel like an option. There was no shade, no landmarks, and no idea how far I would have to go. Staying with the truck felt safer, even though it also felt like being stuck on an island. As the hours passed, the heat drained my energy. I sat in the truck with the doors open, trying not to think too much. Every sound made me look up. The wind brushing against the truck. Small rocks shifting under my boots when I moved. My senses felt sharp, like everything mattered more out here. Late in the afternoon, I noticed tracks in the dirt near the road. Old tire marks, deep and uneven, leading off into the land. They weren't fresh, but they weren't completely gone either. Someone had driven out there before. I followed them on foot, not far, just enough to see what they led to. That was when I saw it. A small structure sitting low against the land, almost hidden by dirt and brush. It looked like an old utility building or a storage shed. The walls were faded and cracked, and the roof sagged in the middle. It didn't look abandoned in the usual way. It looked used, but not cared for. I didn't go inside. I walked around it slowly, checking the ground, the walls, the door. There were signs of recent activity. Footprints pressed into the dirt. Empty fuel cans stacked neatly against one wall. A tire leaning nearby that looked like it might fit my truck. The feeling that hit me then wasn't relief. It was caution. This place wasn't random. Someone came here on purpose. Someone spent time here. I didn't know who, and I didn't know why they would choose a place this far from everything. I stayed outside, watching the horizon, listening. The silence felt thinner now, like it could break at any moment. I kept my distance and waited, hoping daylight would hold on a little longer. As the sun started to drop, the temperature changed fast. The heat drained away and left behind a cold that sank into my clothes. Shadows stretched across the land, turning small dips and rocks into dark shapes that looked deeper than they were. I went back to the truck and locked the doors, even though I knew that wouldn't really stop anything. Time moved slow after that. The sky went from pale orange to dark blue, then black. The stars came out sharp and bright, more than I had ever seen before. The quiet pressed in hard. Every thought felt loud in my head. Sometime during the night, I heard movement far off. Not close enough to see, not clear enough to understand. Just enough to know I wasn't alone out there. I stayed still. I didn't turn on the lights. I focused on breathing and waited for morning. When the sun finally came up, it felt like being pulled back into the world. The land looked the same, but the fear felt smaller in daylight. I stepped out and checked the area again. The structure was still there, unchanged. The tracks were still in the dirt. I made a decision then. I took the tire from near the building and brought it back to the truck. It wasn't perfect, but it held air. I changed it slowly, carefully, watching the land the entire time. My hands shook from cold and tension, but I finished. Before leaving, I walked back to the structure one last time and left the tire I couldn't use where the other one had been. It felt right to leave something behind, to not take without replacing. The truck started without trouble. I drove away steady and slow, not pushing it, not rushing. After a long while, I saw a sign for a paved highway. Then power lines. Then a distant building. The world came back piece by piece. I didn't stop until I reached a town with lights, noise, and people moving around like nothing had ever been wrong. I filled the tank, checked the tires, and sat there for a long time before driving again. That place in the middle of nowhere stayed with me. Not because of something dramatic or violent, but because of how real it felt. How easy it was to slip out of the world without meaning to. How quiet things can get when no one is around to notice. I made it back safely, and the ending was simple and clear. I left that land behind, and I never drove that road again. I was driving through a stretch of land that did not seem to belong to anyone. The road was a thin line of cracked asphalt cutting through flat dirt and dry grass that went on forever. No houses, no power lines, no fences. Just land and sky. I had been on that road for hours, following a route that was supposed to save time, but it slowly felt like a mistake. The sun was already dropping, turning everything a dull orange, and the air looked dusty, like it had weight to it. My truck was old but reliable, or at least I thought it was. The engine noise had been steady all day, but out there, every sound felt louder and more important. The wind pushing against the doors, the tires humming on the road, the small rattle coming from the dashboard. I kept checking the fuel gauge, even though I knew it was fine. There was no cell service for a long time, and I stopped checking my phone because the screen just showed the same thing every time. The farther I went, the more uneasy I felt. There was nothing actually wrong, but the emptiness itself felt wrong. No birds, no insects hitting the windshield, no signs of life. Even the wind felt weak, like the air was holding its breath. I tried to stay focused on the road, but my eyes kept drifting to the sides, searching for something familiar that never came. After a while, the truck started to lose power. It was slow at first, like it was tired. The engine sound changed, becoming rough and uneven. I eased off the gas, hoping it would smooth out, but it only got worse. A few seconds later, the engine cut out completely. The steering went heavy, and I guided the truck onto the shoulder until it rolled to a stop. The silence that followed was immediate and heavy, like someone had shut a door on the world. I sat there for a moment, hands still on the wheel, listening. There was nothing. No other cars, no wind, no distant noise. Just quiet. I tried starting the engine again. It turned over but would not catch. I waited, tried again, same result. The fuel gauge was fine, the battery was fine. It made no sense. I got out of the truck. The air smelled dry and metallic, like hot dust and old iron. The ground was hard and cracked, with small stones pressed into it. The road stretched in both directions, straight and empty, disappearing into the distance. Standing there made me feel small, like I had stepped outside of the normal world. I opened the hood and stared at the engine, even though I am not a mechanic. Everything looked normal to me. No smoke, no leaks, no obvious damage. I checked what I could, then closed the hood. The sun was lower now, and the shadows were getting longer. I knew I could not stay there all night. I grabbed water from the back and locked the truck. I picked a direction and started walking. Each step kicked up dust that hung in the air for a moment before settling. My boots sounded too loud against the quiet. I kept looking behind me without meaning to, as if something might be standing there when I turned around. After walking for what felt like a long time, I noticed something in the distance. It was small and dark against the pale ground. As I got closer, I saw it was a structure, maybe a building or a shed. It looked old, low to the ground and alone. No road leading to it, no tracks, just sitting there like it had been forgotten. The building was made of wood and metal sheets, most of them rusted. Parts of the roof had collapsed, and the door was hanging crooked. Inside, the air was cooler and smelled like mold and oil. There were old tools scattered around, broken chairs, empty cans, and a table covered in dust. It looked like a place that had once been used, and then abandoned in a hurry. I stayed near the entrance, listening. Still nothing. No movement, no sound. I walked around the building, hoping to see some sign of life, but there was none. No fresh tracks, no smoke, no lights. Just decay and silence. As the light faded, the temperature dropped fast. The sky turned deep blue, and the first stars came out, sharp and bright. The dark out there felt different, thicker than normal. I went back inside the building and sat against the wall, conserving energy. I drank small sips of water and kept my flashlight off most of the time, using it only when I needed to check my surroundings. The night dragged on. My mind kept replaying every choice that led me there. The road, the shortcut, the moment the engine died. Every sound made me tense, even my own breathing. At some point, I realized how tired I was, but sleep would not come. I stayed alert, watching the doorway, counting time by the slow movement of the stars. Just before dawn, I heard something different. A low, distant sound, steady and real. It took me a moment to recognize it. An engine. It was far away, but it was there. Relief hit me so hard it almost hurt. I stepped outside as the sky began to lighten, the horizon turning gray. A truck appeared on the road, moving slowly but steadily. I waved my arms, making myself as visible as possible. The truck slowed and stopped near where my own vehicle was parked. The driver got out and looked around, clearly surprised to see anyone out there. I walked back to the road with them nearby, my legs stiff and sore. They helped me check my truck. It turned out a small but critical part had failed, something I could not have fixed on my own. They towed me to a small town hours away, a place that barely showed up on maps but felt like a city to me after that night. Later, after repairs were done and I was back on a main highway, I looked at the map again. The road I had taken was marked, but the building was not. No symbol, no note, nothing. It was like it did not exist. I did not take shortcuts after that. I stayed on roads that had traffic, signs, and names. The middle of nowhere taught me how thin the line is between normal life and being completely alone, and how fast the world can empty out when something simple goes wrong. I was driving through a part of the country that barely showed up on the map. The road was a thin strip of cracked asphalt cutting through flat land that seemed to go on forever. No houses, no stores, no fences. Just dry grass, low bushes, and a sky that felt too big. I had taken this route to save time, or at least that was what the GPS suggested before it lost signal an hour earlier. I kept going because turning around felt pointless, and I expected to see something eventually. A town, a gas station, anything. The farther I drove, the more isolated everything felt. The radio turned into static, so I shut it off. The sound of the tires on the road became the only noise, steady and dull. Every now and then I passed an old wooden pole leaning at an angle, the wires long gone. Some poles had numbers sprayed on them in faded paint, but nothing else explained why they were there. It felt like the remains of a place that had been forgotten on purpose. I noticed my fuel gauge was lower than I expected. I tried to remember the last time I had filled up, and the memory felt farther away than it should have. I slowed down a little, watching the road closely, hoping to see a sign for a station. The sun was already starting to drop, turning the light yellow and long. Shadows stretched across the road from things I couldn't even see clearly. Eventually, my car started to feel different. The engine sounded rough, like it was struggling. I eased off the gas, but it didn't help. A few seconds later, the car lost power completely. I coasted to the side of the road and stopped. When I turned the key, nothing happened. No sound, no warning lights. Just silence. I sat there for a moment, hands on the steering wheel, listening to the quiet. It was the kind of quiet that made small sounds feel loud, like my breathing or the ticking of the engine as it cooled. I stepped out of the car. The air was dry and smelled like dust and hot metal. The road looked exactly the same in both directions, disappearing into the distance. No movement anywhere. I checked my phone. No signal. I tried restarting it anyway, even though I knew it wouldn't help. Still nothing. I looked around again, hoping I had missed something before. That was when I noticed tire tracks in the dirt beside the road. They didn't look fresh, but they were clear enough to see. They led away from the road, toward a cluster of low hills far off in the distance. I didn't want to leave the car, but standing there felt worse. If someone else had driven out here before, maybe there was something nearby. I grabbed some water from the trunk and started walking, keeping the road in sight at first. The ground was uneven, and the dirt shifted under my shoes. Every step kicked up dust that stuck to my clothes. As I walked farther, the road slowly dropped out of view. The land dipped and rose in small waves, making it hard to tell how far I had gone. The sun continued to sink, and the light changed fast. The heat of the day faded, replaced by a chill that crept in without warning. I started to feel how alone I really was. After a long walk, I saw something that didn't belong. A structure stood near the base of one of the hills. It looked like an old building, maybe a small facility or storage place. The walls were concrete, stained dark by years of weather. Parts of the roof had collapsed, leaving twisted metal exposed. There were no lights, no signs of life, but it was the first man-made thing I had seen in hours. I approached slowly, scanning the ground. There were more tire tracks here, overlapping and messy, like vehicles had come and gone many times. Near the entrance, the ground was packed down hard. The door was gone, leaving a wide opening into darkness. I stood there for a while, weighing my options. Staying outside didn't feel safe, and going back to the car in the dark felt worse. Inside, the air was cooler. The floor was covered in dust and debris. Old equipment lay scattered around, rusted and broken. I could tell this place had been abandoned for a long time, but not all at once. It looked like people had left in a hurry, then come back later, then left again. Nothing was neatly stored. Nothing was completely destroyed either. I moved carefully, shining my phone's weak flashlight around. There were deep marks on the floor, like something heavy had been dragged across it more than once. In one corner, I found empty fuel containers crushed and dry. That told me two things. Someone had used this place recently enough to leave those behind, and fuel had been important out here. I didn't see anyone, and I didn't hear anything, but the feeling of being watched settled in anyway. Not in a dramatic way, just a quiet pressure in my chest. I reminded myself that fear fills gaps when there's no information. This was just a building in the middle of nowhere. Nothing more. I stayed inside until night fully set in. The temperature dropped fast, and the wind picked up, whistling through cracks in the walls. I didn't sleep much. Every sound pulled me back awake. The building shifted and creaked as it cooled, making sharp pops that echoed in the empty space. When morning came, the light revealed more details. From a higher point near the back of the building, I could see the road again. It was farther than I realized, but still reachable. What I also saw was a long line of tracks leading away from the building in the opposite direction. Fresh ones. That meant someone had been here recently, maybe even during the night. I didn't wait around. I left as soon as the sun was up enough to see clearly. The walk back felt longer, and my legs ached by the time I reached the road. My car was still there, exactly where I left it. No signs that anyone had been near it. I sat beside it, trying to think. Hours later, a vehicle finally appeared on the horizon. It was real, solid, and moving fast. Relief hit me so hard it made me dizzy. I stayed by the car until help arrived, and I was taken back towards civilization. Later, after everything was handled and my car was towed, I looked up the area. There were no towns listed, no buildings marked, nothing official. The place I stayed in didn't exist on any map I could find. That bothered me more than getting stranded. People had been there. They had left tracks, burned fuel, and moved heavy equipment. They just didn't want to be known. I still think about that stretch of road sometimes. About how easy it was to disappear there without anything dramatic happening at all. No monsters, no strange lights. Just distance, silence, and a place where help doesn't come unless you're lucky enough to last long enough to see it. I was driving through a part of the country that barely showed up on the map. The road was a single strip of cracked asphalt cutting through miles of dry land and low hills. No houses, no gas stations, no fences, just dirt, rocks, and scrub that looked the same in every direction. I had been on that road for hours, watching the fuel gauge slowly sink while the sun leaned lower in the sky. I remember thinking that the place felt unfinished, like people were never meant to stay there long. The car started acting strange without warning. The engine lost power for a second, then came back, then did it again. I eased off the gas, hoping it would settle down, but instead it coughed hard and died completely. The car rolled forward in silence until it stopped on the shoulder. When I tried to restart it, the engine turned but never caught. I tried again. Same result. I popped the hood and stepped out into the heat. The air was thick and still. No wind at all. The smell of hot metal came off the engine, mixed with dust and dry plants. I knew enough about cars to recognize that whatever was wrong was not something I could fix on the side of the road. I stood there longer than I should have, just staring at the engine, as if looking harder would change something. There was no cell signal. I already knew that before I checked. The phone showed nothing but empty bars. I looked up and down the road. Nothing moved. No cars. No animals. Not even birds. The quiet felt heavy, pressing in on my ears. I got back into the car and waited, hoping someone would pass. Minutes stretched out. Then an hour. The sun kept dropping, and the heat slowly drained away, replaced by a cold that crept in fast. As daylight faded, I noticed things I had not seen before. Old tire tracks leading off the road into the dirt. Rusted metal scraps half buried in the ground. A wooden post leaning at an angle with no sign attached to it anymore. It looked like the remains of something abandoned long ago. That made my chest tighten in a way I could not explain. I decided to walk. I grabbed a bottle of water and followed the road in the direction I had been driving, thinking there had to be something ahead. Each step felt louder than it should have. My boots scraped on loose gravel, and the sound echoed in the open space. After about 20 minutes, I realized the land around me had changed slightly. The ground dipped and rose more sharply, and the road curved in a way that blocked my view ahead. That was when I saw the building. It sat far off the road, low and wide, made of concrete stained dark by time. Parts of the roof had collapsed, and weeds pushed up through cracks in the foundation. There were no windows, just empty holes where they used to be. It looked like some kind of old utility building or storage site. I stood there debating whether to go closer. Something about it felt wrong, but the idea of staying alone on the road in the dark felt worse. I approached slowly. The closer I got, the more signs I saw that someone had been there recently. Fresh footprints in the dirt, tire marks that were not old, a piece of plastic that had not been faded by the sun yet. My mouth went dry. I reminded myself that signs of people should have made me feel safer, but instead they made me tense. Inside the building, the air was cooler but smelled stale. The floor was covered in dust, trash, and old equipment parts. There were no lights, only what little glow came from the dying sun outside. I stayed near the entrance, listening. My breathing sounded too loud. Every small noise made my shoulders tighten. I noticed a corner where the dust was disturbed, like something heavy had been dragged across the floor. There were deep scuff marks leading toward a back room. I did not go that way. I backed out slowly, keeping my eyes on the dark opening until I was outside again. The sky was almost black now. I realized how exposed I was. Middle of nowhere, broken car, no signal, and signs that someone else used this place. I chose to head back to my car, moving faster now, but trying not to look panicked. Every few steps, I glanced behind me. Nothing followed. Still, the feeling did not leave. When I reached the car, I locked the doors and sat inside, holding the water bottle like it mattered. The cold set in hard after the sun fully disappeared. I wrapped myself in a jacket and stayed awake, listening. The night had sounds now. Wind brushing the ground. Small animals moving in the brush. Once far off, I heard the low sound of an engine. It faded before I could tell where it came from. Hours passed like that. My eyes burned from staying open. Just before dawn, headlights appeared around the curve in the road. I felt a rush of relief so strong it almost hurt. The vehicle slowed when it saw my car and stopped behind me. I stayed inside until I saw a uniform and a marked truck. It was a road maintenance crew starting their morning route. They helped me call for a tow and waited with me until it arrived. When the car was loaded up, I took one last look at the empty land stretching out on both sides of the road. In the daylight, it looked harmless again, just quiet and empty. But I knew better. That place was not empty at all. It was simply wide enough to hide whatever passed through it. When I finally left, watching the road disappear behind me, I felt something settle in my chest. I had made it out. The night was over. The middle of nowhere stayed right where it was, and I never went back. I was driving through a part of the country that didn't feel like it belonged to anyone anymore. The road was narrow, cracked, and faded to the point where the lines barely showed. Trees pressed in on both sides, thick and tall, blocking the sky. There were no houses, no mailboxes, no power lines. Just forest and road, stretching out in front of me like it had no end. I had been driving for hours without seeing another car. The radio lost signal a long time ago, and my phone had no service. I wasn't lost yet, but I was far enough out that help felt very far away. I was headed to a small job site, a temporary contract that paid well but required travel. I had printed directions because GPS was unreliable out here. The paper sat on the passenger seat, creased and smudged from my hands. According to the map, this road was the only way in and out. That thought stayed in my head longer than I liked. The further I drove, the quieter everything became. Even with the windows cracked, there were no birds, no wind, no movement. It felt wrong, like the world had paused. The trees were packed so close together that the sunlight barely reached the ground. Shadows stretched across the road, making it hard to see what was ahead. I slowed down without realizing it. That's when I noticed something off to the right side of the road. At first it looked like a pile of trash or old wood. As I got closer, I realized it was a vehicle. An old pickup truck sat just beyond the trees, angled like it had been pushed off the road years ago. The tires were flat, the windows broken, and the metal was rusted through in places. The doors were open. There were no plates on it, no signs of recent activity. It looked abandoned, but the way it sat there made my stomach tighten. It wasn't deep in the woods. It was close, like someone wanted it hidden, but not too hidden. I kept driving. About 10 minutes later, my car started acting up. The engine sputtered, then steadied, then sputtered again. I pressed the gas gently, hoping it was nothing. The fuel gauge showed half a tank. No warning lights were on, but the sound was wrong. A low grinding noise started underneath, faint but constant. I rolled the windows down more, trying to listen. The car finally died without warning. The steering wheel locked, and I coasted to a stop in the middle of the road. I tried the ignition again. The engine turned over once, then nothing. The silence that followed felt heavy. I sat there gripping the wheel, listening to my own breathing. I checked my phone again, even though I already knew. No signal. No bars at all. I got out of the car. The air felt cooler than it should have been. The smell of damp earth and old leaves hung around me. I opened the hood and stared at the engine like that would somehow fix it. I didn't know much about cars, but I knew enough to tell something was very wrong. A hose had been sliced clean through. Not torn. Not worn down. Cut. That's when I noticed the footprints. They were in the dirt along the side of the road, leading from the woods toward my car. Deep prints, uneven like someone was limping or carrying something heavy. They didn't look old. The edges were still sharp. I felt a slow wave of fear roll through me, the kind that makes your hands go numb. I looked back toward the trees. Nothing moved. No sound. No birds. No insects. Just the forest standing still. I locked the car doors even though I was standing outside, then realized how useless that was. I grabbed my bag from the back seat. Inside were some tools, water, and a flashlight. I didn't know how far I was from anything, but standing there felt worse than moving. I started walking down the road in the direction I had come from. Every step felt loud. Gravel crunched under my boots. My eyes kept drifting to the trees, scanning for movement. The forest felt too close, like it was leaning in. After what felt like an hour but was probably less, I saw something ahead. A clearing. As I got closer, I realized it was an old service station. The building was small, the windows boarded up, the roof sagging. A single pump stood out front, long dead. The place looked forgotten, but it was solid enough to offer some shelter. Around the back, I found something that made my heart sink. Fresh tire tracks. Deep ones. More footprints. And near the building, a pile of personal items. A backpack. A jacket. A shoe. They were laid out, not scattered. Placed. I didn't go inside. I didn't touch anything. I backed away slowly, my pulse pounding in my ears. That's when I heard movement behind me. Not a voice. Not footsteps. Just the sound of something heavy shifting weight in the woods. I ran. I didn't stop until my lungs burned and my legs felt weak. The road curved ahead, and through the trees I saw flashing lights. Red and blue, cutting through the dark green of the forest. I ran harder. A park ranger truck was parked sideways across the road. 2 officers stood near it, scanning the area. I reached them shaking, covered in sweat and dirt. I didn't speak at first. I couldn't. My mouth felt dry and stiff. They took me back to my car. By the time we got there, the footprints were gone. The cut hose was still there, clean and obvious. The ranger told me that area was known for illegal activity, people living off-grid, sometimes dangerous ones. Missing persons had been reported nearby over the years. The service station wasn't on any official map anymore. They towed my car and drove me out of the forest. As we left, I looked back at the road disappearing into the trees. It looked normal again. Quiet. Empty. I never took jobs that led me that far out again. I still think about that place sometimes, how close I was to becoming another item left behind. Out there in the middle of nowhere, it's easy to disappear, and even easier for no one to ever know why.